the second slide, which is the agenda.
We are now live, folks. And Julie, whenever you're ready.
Hello, Reston Association community, Reston Association members. Those who are enjoying our lakes, one of our great assets. I welcome you tonight to the Lake Thoreau Environmental Health Community Meeting. We've been working on some information to share with you over the last couple of weeks, as well as I hope you've had an opportunity to view some of our videos. We had a short version and a long version that we were hopeful could help convey some information. And we really are hoping that tonight, as part of our agenda, that we'll get to a real dialogue with you, our community. So I thank you for your interest and patience in gathering information and preparing for this dialogue. A few administrative things. We will be monitoring the chat room tonight. We will be looking for, hands raised so that we can make sure we get to call on you to get your questions, get answers, discuss the community engagement. I know in Reston we treasure and love our lakes, and so we have a special interest in that. And as your South Lakes District Director, and having 2 of our 4 lakes in our district, I am biased, I have to admit, towards our focus on how they reflect and can represent environmental health in our community. I have worked with our directors, our 2 members at large, Tom Mulcairn and Sarah, who are both past and current Board of Directors liaisons to the Environmental Advisory Committee, and to pull together this meeting, along with our CEO and COO, who the board charges our staff to maintain the operations, maintain our facilities for us, and to reflect our needs. I know Tom Mulcairn, I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to speak because you have a perspective that's firsthand, living on the lake as well as being a director. So the first thing, before I turn it to Tom, I would like, Larry, if you could go to the agenda, and I'll just kind of go through that, and then I'll ask Tom to speak. So we're going to give you some history. We will not test you at the end, but we want to give you a little bit of history and what we've done over the years to manage Lake Thoreau, some options and probable costs that we looked at and reviewed, an overview of the recent treatments that we've done with the president of Aquatic Environment Consultants. We've asked Britt to come in and speak to the EAC perspective, as well as what they've been doing with the Razor report. Then we'd like those folks to all present and then go to Q&A. I think that'll help speed through the night. Following that, we'll discuss next steps and community engagement. So Tom, can you help put this meeting into perspective on how important it is and what your experiences have been before we turn it over to Larry to lead us through?
Sure. I guess I'll just jump into it. Thank you, Julie, for giving me the chance to spend a few minutes just to kind of break down what happened and where we are. My name is Tom Mulcairn. I live at 2030 Lakewinds Drive. I am on the board of directors for RA. More importantly for this discussion, my wife and I have owned a home on Lake Thoreau for 30 years, actually this August. So as I always tell my guests when I have them over, I say, I have a nice townhouse, but I have an awesome backyard. And so we all have we have a great backyard to play in. As a family, we spend time sitting on the lake, we sit on our dock, we sit on the dock boat. I even have a turtle platform in the backyard, which we enjoy watching the turtles sunning themselves. in the last 30 years, I've seen the water clarity change each season. When we initially moved into the townhouse, we would always have like 6 or 7 carp. Each were like 3 or 4 feet long, hanging out in the cove, and they have all passed away. This season, the grass was very high in several coves, but the quality, the clarity of the water was fantastic. So when RA responded to some members requesting to address the grass problems, I, like most of you, were very upset when the lake turned from a crystal clear into various shades of green. As a result, I and my fellow board member, Sarah D'Souza, set up an appointment with Larry Butler and Doug Britt to have them over to float in the lake. Both have been involved in lake management for 20 plus years, so a great resource for us to chat with. And the point of the discussion was to find out what was done and more importantly, what we can and should do in the future to maintain the lakes. Doug was not available that evening, but fortunately for us, he is available tonight. We spent a little over an hour listening to Larry describe the chemistry behind lake management and all the options available. And I quickly learned that there's not a simple solution that will make everyone happy. But I left that meeting knowing that Reston Association will continue to work to find the right balance to keep this valuable resource clean and safe. Sarah and I worked with Julie Bitzer and the Reston staff to make sure you had a forum to voice your opinions and get some of the information you need. Larry and Doug's presentations should be very enlightening for everyone tonight. I've had several conversations with members that live on the lakes. I know that many people in the community feel that RA is not doing enough to keep.
Went on to mute, Tom.
Hey, Tom, you started to say about what the community thought.
Okay, looks like I jumped out there. Basically, I know that the people in the community feel that RA is not doing enough to keep them informed. So hopefully we can use tonight's meeting to address your concerns. Plus we can learn, the RA staff can learn what to do better to open up the communication with its members. That's pretty much what I wanted to say, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Great intro and setting the stage. So now I'm going to turn it to those who have to get us to where the promised land of great lakes and great boating and great backyards. So Larry, can you take it away?
I sure can. Thank you, Julie and Tom, and welcome everybody. Look forward to the chat this evening. What I want to do is go through a little bit of just a few facts and then a little bit of historical perspective and talk about some of the management options that are available to Reston Association and for that matter for most people who manage lakes throughout the mid-Atlantic. But first I want to give a little background about Lake Thoreau. It is a multi-use impoundment. It's a stormwater management reservoir that was put in back in the early 70s as part of Reston Land's overall stormwater management plan and so forth. But it also is a recreational amenity, boating, fishing. Aesthetics is important. We know that. And of course, it's also great for fish and wildlife habitat. So the lake will be 50 years old next year. So it's getting up there in age from a lake speak standpoint. It's got a surface area of about 40 acres, average depth of about 200 feet, and it's got a 400-acre watershed, which is actually a real benefit for this lake. And despite having the golf course in the watershed, that is a very small watershed to lake surface area ratio, which compared to Lake Audubon, as an example, is about 45 acres and has a 1,600-acre watershed. So there's a lot more watershed inputs into Lake Audubon, which includes the 400 acres of Lake Thoreau, than Lake Thoreau does on its own. And like most lakes in urban areas, we have a high percent of impervious surface. It's about 23% the Lake Thoreau watershed. So any rainfall that hits sidewalks, roofs, roads, gets into the storm sewer system and ends up in the lake within that 400-acre watershed. So stormwater runoff is a big concern. Erosion and sedimentation of ground, yards, wherever. And nutrient loading is the main concern. We're going to talk a little bit later, phosphorus and nitrogen, just real briefly, but those are the two main components that drive algae and for that matter, aquatic plants in general. And cultural eutrophication. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this. Maybe Doug will, because I want to get to the meat of it. But eutrophication is the aging of lakes, and cultural eutrophication is where you have humans involved in the watershed where lakes age faster. And as opposed to a completely forested watershed, lakes may take hundreds of years to fill in with sediment and so forth, but that is not the case when you have a highly developed watershed. So now I want to touch on some of the past management actions in Lake Thoreau. We've been doing water quality monitoring since the early 80s. We have one of the most robust data sets for urban lakes that I know of, at least certainly in this region. And we focus on biological traits. It's phosphorus, nitrogen, dissolved oxygen, temperature, phytoplankton, which is essentially the algae, and the zooplankton, which are the little critters that eat the algae and really form the very bottom of the food chain for the fish and so forth. So we're really looking at it, the monitoring is for biological health. In 1984, adopted the lakes in, I think, 1983 from Reston Land Corporation. And in 1984, we did the first management activity. On July 6th of that year, we stocked grass carp for South American Elodea. 40% of the lake was covered with Elodea. We also stocked Lake Ann the same day. And we were the first shipment of grass carp permitted into the state. There was one other lake in the state, and the grass carp came up from Lone Oak, Arkansas, of all places, but that was where the state recommended and required us to get them from. And an important thing with that original stocking, we stocked at 2/3 of the rate recommended at that time, and our water quality consultant, or lake consultant, recommended 2/3. And in 2 years, there wasn't a plant left in the lake, and there wasn't a plant left in the lake for probably the next 15 years. So, and as you'll hear later, that's not really the goal, but that's what happened. We've done 2 more recent stockings, 3 additional stockings, 2011, 13, and 18. And those 2 most recent stockings were 80 grass carp each. And again, the reason for that is to try to control, not eradicate the plants, because the plants are very important to the ecology of the lake. We also do periodic dredging of accumulated sediments, typically in the shallower cove areas. And those are the dates reflected there. And again, some of the other lakes, Lake Audubon gets dredged more frequently because it has a much larger watershed with a lot of inputs and a lot of natural stream channel in it, even though hopefully we'll see that reduced with the stream restoration. And then we've done herbicide and algicide treatments in those years. And so again, it's important to understand that, we have been actively managing this lake, all the lakes, for, better part of 30+ years. And then we've also done fish population surveys, mid-80s. And of course, we were happy that the Department of Game and Inland Fishery came out last year and did a survey for us, as well as a couple other lakes. So that's a little bit of history of the past management actions. The current issues. I'm going to use the term submerged aquatic vegetation. That's, in lake speak, we just call them SAVs, not species related, but just submerged aquatic vegetation. And of course, this year we had probably one of the most invasive exotic species in the country with hydrilla. And I think most of you are very familiar with that. I'm not going to go into the details of it. I think Bill's going to touch on some of the reasons that it's so aggressive and typically hard to control. And of course, we had a blue-green algae bloom on the heels of for the hydrilla. So this creates a conundrum to some degree. Aquatic plants make the water more clear. Tom alluded to that. Great for fish and wildlife, but too much of a good thing can impact other uses, the recreation, the aesthetics, et cetera. So what we're trying to do is find a balance of all those uses that pleases the most people, we'll say. And then when you control submerged aquatic vegetation, it can potentially increase algae bloom because you're making that phosphorus and nitrogen available to the algae rather than being taken up by the actual plants. And then a well-balanced lake system typically has 20 to 30% coverage of aquatic plants on the bottom. So that the problem is when they get up high in the water column, and then they impact recreation, propellers and things like that. So those were essentially the things that happened this year, and they've happened in past years as well, and we've managed those. So what I want to talk about now, I just put this all on one slide. I'm going to go through each of these individually. So for submerged aquatic vegetation management options, we're going to talk about the grass carp, herbicides, and harvesting. And then the algae management options are algicides, and alum treatment, or let it run its course, which is in fact what happened in this most recent bloom that we had. But an important note here at the bottom, in all of these, and I know Doug would agree with this, reducing nutrient inputs to the lake is a key cultural management objective. And you know, how do you keep phosphorus out of the lake to begin with? And how do you keep nitrogen out of the lake? And you know, talk about lawn fertilizers and things like that. So that's something that everybody can help participate in. Anybody that lives in the watershed, Lake Thoreau or the other lakes in Reston, because each lake will reap benefits from that. So let's talk about the triploid grass carp. Again, we were one of the first lakes in the state to get them back in the early 80s. It is an inexpensive control option, but it is really difficult to get a stocking rate to control versus eradicate all the plants. And so when we did the two smaller stockings of the past two stockings, that was our goal. We were trying to get to a control point, but not eradicate all the plants, because I know the fishermen do not want to see all the plants eradicated, nor do the turtles and the other wildlife that eat the lake. And as I already said, eradicating all the vegetation is not good for the lake health. To stock 80 more fish, $1,200 roughly. And so that's again, this is a rather inexpensive vegetation management option. Aquatic herbicides, it's a chemical introduction to the lake, obviously. It's usually highly effective and can be targeted depending on the product used. There are generally very few use restrictions with the products that we have used in the past. Typically, the only one is for irrigation. The 2020 cost for this year's single treatment was $7,300. And one of the better ways to control it is actually using a lower dosage, very low dosage over 3 targeted doses using pellets. And I should point out that this year's treatment was a contact herbicide, and the lower dose is actually these pellets that get down, and it's a systemic type of herbicide. So it actually kills the tubers, you know, the roots and so forth. So it's actually a more effective control method, albeit more expensive at approximately $20,000 for those three treatments. Mechanical harvesting, the aquatic lawnmower. That's essentially what this is. It does not completely remove the plants. Depending on the size of the harvester, they variable depths, but was 3 to 5 feet below the water surface. They are very intensive operations, labor. You got to trailer it to get to each lake. The city of Norfolk has one. They have a very large one. And I know the reservoir manager down there, and he said it's not fun, but it is effective for, you know, skimming off the vegetation. But with a plant like hydrilla, it can grow back up to probably interfere with recreation in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks. Also, there are a number of these plants, hydrilla being one of the main culprits, where the fragments can take root and grow as well. So you may actually be spreading it to other parts of the lake where it wasn't found before. We have looked for contractors. We're still waiting to hear back from one contractor that we found up in New Jersey. Have not heard back from him. And we've researched the purchase of the equipment, and it's not inexpensive, $70,000 to $170,000, depending on the size, and then, you know, the attachments you have to get. We did use a harvester twice in the 80s, and that was actually specifically for the Reston Triathlon in Lake Audubon, because it had the South American Elodea, and the grass carp had not taken them completely out. The following year, that was pretty much done. And actually the triathlon paid for that work. So again, that's the harvester option. Now I'm going to move to algae. So we talked about the submerged aquatic vegetation. Now we're going to go to the algae. And so algae, which we have used both in Lake Ann and Lake Thoreau, again, it's a chemical introduction to the lake. It does provide effective control, and typically it's multiple applications at low concentrations. And the key there is to treat early and then treat throughout the season. Again, at very low doses. The important thing to note, though, is that it's effective against blue-green algae, but also beneficial algae. And when we talked about the food chain, I just touched on that earlier, where the algae are eaten by the zooplankton, which are the little tiny animals that young fish feed on. If you're taking out the algae, then you are, we'll just, for lack of a better term, messing with the food chain. And the cost per season for an algicides, this is on an individual lake, is approximately, for Lake Thoreau, is approximately $5,000. And we would only do that if the monitoring that's done 6 times a year, April through the end of September, warrants it based on the volume and the mass of the cells in the samples. Alum treatment. So adding aluminum sulfate into the water column can precipitate out phosphorus where it's bound in the sediment layer. And so what this does, it reduces the available phosphorus for algae growth. It's possible, if the system is designed correctly, that you can get 5 years or perhaps more of phosphorus inactivation. Now, the important thing about Lake Thoreau, and I actually stated this in the video, but for those of you who have ever, I'm not recommending you go swim in Lake Thoreau, but for those who maybe have, and you said, well, I want to see if I can touch the bottom, and you point down and you sink and you hit a spot that's really cold. You've now hit the thermocline. And in the summer months, the lake gets separated into the epilimnion, which is the top, where the algae grow, the photic zone, if you will, and then the hypolimnion. And down in those bottom waters, which is the vast majority of the volume of Lake Thoreau during the summer months, there is almost no oxygen. So the fish generally don't live down there unless perhaps there's some plants growing in little deeper areas. The concern with that is that the anaerobic decomposition of sediments releases phosphorus. And so there's a large pulse of what we call internal loading. External loading is what comes in from the watershed or rainfall. Internal loading is what's happening within the lake itself. So the decomposition in that anaerobic layer releases phosphorus, and alum treatment could take care of some of that. It requires a fair amount of modeling, both of the phosphorus itself and the water throughput. How quickly does the lake's volume get flushed via rain and storm events? And the range of cost for that is $80,000 to $175,000. So that's another thing that we have talked to a couple firms that do specifically. Now, what I want to do at this point is go to Bill Kirkpatrick. He's the president of Aquatic Environment Consultants. They've been doing our water quality monitoring for about 20 years. They are registered and certified applicators, and they've also done our algicide and herbicide treatments. And so I want to turn it over to Bill to kind of give an overview of, what happened this year and the treatments that were done this year.
Thank you, Larry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Larry did a very good job of explaining kind of various options in management of these freshwater inland lakes. They're very complex systems, and they're very complicated to manage, and there's not one size that fits all for all the lakes. Each of the lakes at Reston is unique in its own set, and different things are taking place in different lakes based on the need of those lakes. As Larry said, the huge extensive database that Reston has for all their lakes, which is very unique and unusual, but it allows us to track the trends of these water bodies over a long period of time. I should state that aquatic vegetation is very beneficial in water bodies. I'm talking the rooted vascular plants. The algae, the microscopic green algae are part of the food chain. The blue-green algae have no place in the food chain, and they cause a problem, and they tend to compete with the good algae. We've been working on Lake Thoreau, working with the management of the algae blooms over time and also the vascular plants. As far as vascular plants being important and necessary, they play a big role in the habitat for the fish, but not all vascular plants are created equally. You have invasive species and you have native species. And what happens in these systems is if you get an invasive species introduced into the water body, they outcompete the native species. They grow at densities that are too thick for beneficial aquatic habitat. The fish have to use the edges of them. They can't feed in the thick beds. And so you have hydrilla, which is one of the nastiest invasive submerged aquatic plant species that's out there to have in your lake. Management approach has been to only treat with aquatic herbicides if conditions get to a level where residents are having problems with that. The plan and the goal has been to get the grass carp to a balance where they are managing the aquatic vegetation at a level that's allows them to be present, but also is acceptable for lake users to use the lake. This summer, with the recent stockings of grass carp, we were hopeful that they would be able to get a handle on the growth of the vascular plants in the lake. And so we waited and waited, and they didn't get hold of it. And we get to the middle of the summer and the hydrilla is bad and residents are complaining about it. So at that point, there were not really a lot of options. And so we employed the use of contact herbicides. Contact herbicides are one type of herbicide. The other herbicide is a systemic herbicide. Systemic herbicides get into a plant and interfere with the metabolic processes of that plant, and they die slower over a long period of time. They can take 60 days or more to kill those plants. Time was of the essence, and it was too late in the year to use systemic herbicide treatments. So we employed the contact herbicide treatments. And when they hit the plant, they kill plant cells on contact. Those plant cells, because of the hot water, break down very rapidly. And right prior to the treatment of the vascular plants, before the herbicide treatment, the lake was extremely clear. In fact, I believe we only did one algae treatment this summer. No other algae treatments were conducted because the lake was clear and water quality was good. But when the plants died, all of those nutrients are released from that vegetation into the water column. And with the hot water, warm weather, an algae bloom then came on because of that. At that point, the algae was heavier than we wanted to mess with and fear that there could be an oxygen depletion. So a treatment was not conducted at that point. Normally what and Larry said earlier in the presentation, what we want to do is treat the algae densities when they're low. We can come in with a lower dose of algicide and not shock the system and keep the algae at bay. And typically those treatments are conducted on about a monthly basis. We monitor the lakes, and shortly after the monitoring, a treatment is decided whether or not we're going to proceed with the treatment based on the results of the monitoring a few days prior to that. And that's kind of where the situation is with the lakes this year, that the algae bloom came after the hydrilla died, and now we're kind of waiting for the algae to burn itself out and continue to monitor the situation.
Thank you, Bill. So I think now we'll move on to Doug Britt, who's our chair of our Environmental Advisory Committee.
Thanks, Larry. A lot of what I was planning to say has already been spoken, so I will try to make it short. But just as further background to the lakes in general, they are, as stormwater management reservoirs, man-made, and they suffer from, as Larry mentioned, the term cultural eutrophication, which is the enrichment, and in this case, accelerated enrichment by our activities as residents in the watershed. All lakes go through this process naturally, but ours are going through it faster because of the location in the development area. Now, a trophic status index, or TSI, is a measure of eutrophication. Various water quality parameters can be used to calculate a TSI for a particular body of water. And TSIs have been calculated for all the Reston lakes for many, many years. The TSI value above 50, to make it simple, is considered an indication of a eutrophic lake. Above 70 is hypereutrophic and in serious trouble, probably from an environmental health standpoint. And lakes that are in the 35 to 50 range are considered mesotropic, much more desirable. Our Reston lakes are all pretty much in that very early eutrophic state, but Lake Thoreau is the best of all of them. Its average TSI is just under 50 most years. So I just wanted to point out that Thoreau historically has had the best water quality of the lakes in our watersheds. Now I want to talk about RACER for a minute. For those of you who aren't familiar, RACER stands for the Reston Annual Environmental Status Report. And it has been produced every year since 2017, and where it's analyzed and published at the end of the year. And the report compares historical data to present day conditions for 10 categories of environmental attributes of our community, including our lakes and ponds. The report is comprehensive in its coverage and typically approaches about 100 pages in length, but includes a much shorter executive summary that provides a qualitative conclusion regarding the status of each environmental attribute. They're simply described as good, fair, poor, or indeterminate. The Reston lakes and ponds element of this has always been evaluated and rated as fair year after year. The full RACER report is now being updated every other year, and this year, 2020, is one of those years. So we expect to deliver a final report to the RA board in November or December of this year. I should mention, with regard to lake data, we have complete data from 2018 and 2019 from a variety of sources, but the 2020 environmental lake monitoring data is usually not made available until the end of the year. So that'll be after the publication of this report. In addition to the assessment that is involved in the RACER provides a series of recommendations for further improving or otherwise protecting the environmental amenities of our community. And on an annual basis, the Environmental Advisory Committee also produces a RACER report card, which assesses the progress made towards implementing the various RACER recommendations. So an early announcement here to follow the RACER report and follow that report card and see what progress is being made. With respect to Lake Thoreau, as I mentioned, it is the best water quality of the 4 lakes. It's noteworthy that much of the water coming in stems from storm water drainage from the Reston National Golf Course, Campus Commons, and Soapstone Drive. With respect to water chemistry, we've already kind of heard the important parts of that, but the phosphorus concentrations, interestingly, given that we've seen this trend over the last several years of more and more severe blue-green algal blooms in Lake Thoreau, but it does have a relatively decent phosphorus total lake concentration, and this 2019 had among the lowest readings, I think, that had been recorded. The aquatic weed problems that you've just heard Bill talk about very succinctly Lake Thoreau has had a number of infestations over the years: yellow floating heart, Eurasian water milfoil, variable leaf pondweed, fire flag, alligator weed, fanwort, as well as hydrilla. So it's faced a number of problems which have been successfully treated in the past. And the hydrilla is the big problem right now. I guess fanwort and variable leaf pondweed and hydrilla are the biggest concerns of the vascular plants in the lake now. But hydrilla is the one that really interferes with recreational use and boaters. The grass carp that were stocked clearly have not been able to control it recently. I did find it interesting when the State Department of Game and Inland Fisheries did their survey of our lakes in 2019 and Lake Newport in 2020. They indicated that they found multiple year classes of grass carp in all the lakes, and advised that there was probably no need for any additional stockings, at least for foreseeable future. Sediment accumulation, of course, is another problem. And in the last sediment dredging in Thoreau took out 4,200 cubic yards of sediment from 12 different coves. Shoreline stabilization because of erosion along Lake Thoreau is also a problem. And there's been a lot of activity, particularly since 2016, with Reston Association and some of the clusters putting in biologs to help stabilize the shoreline from erosion. The fishery survey that has been mentioned, I would like to point out Lake Thoreau has a good fishery, not exceptional, but the state considers it a good fishery, although it's somewhat imbalanced with not enough forage fish to produce large bass. So recommendations have been made to increase rebalance the ratio of forage to predatory fish in that lake. And that can be done in two ways. One is by removing more predatory fish, particularly the smaller size bass, or stocking with golden shiners or some other forage fish. And the state also recommended that to have more cover in the lake. And that gets back to the point that both Bill and Larry made about not overdoing the removal of vegetation from these lakes. So in summary, I think from the standpoint of what we have been able to determine in looking at hundreds of data reports over the last 30 or 40 years covering the watersheds of Reston, says the hydrilla and the blue-green algae are the most serious impairments still facing Lake Thoreau. But one of the things I want to also express as a concern going forward is that an exacerbating issue to the problem of nutrient enrichment that causes these problems with the vascular plants and the algae is climate change. Because we are experiencing warmer and warmer summers and epilimnion or upper surface temperatures in our lakes. And we are getting more intense rainstorms and precipitation. And both of those natural phenomena can increase the probability of algal blooms in our lakes. And there's been a number of reports to indicate just the changing temperature is favoring blue-greens over some of the better, more desirable green algae species. So we remember going forward, our challenges may be a little bit tougher than they have been in the past. With that, I don't want to take up any more time, but say that rapid detection of problems as they're starting to occur is certainly very important for our ability to get control of the situation so that can be handled more effectively and with less costs early on. And that speaks to all of us, I live on Lake Newport, all of us in a watershed, it's our own responsibilities to report these when we see the conditions changing in an adverse way. And also, regardless of what control measures are taken on a lake, whether it's physical or chemical or biological, we as lake owners and residents in the watershed, regardless of in in-lake controls, have a lot to do with the health of our lakes by how we control the runoff on our own property. And certainly, if we can start implementing what's called low development control technologies on our land to help retain runoff and keep nutrients and sediments from moving from our land into the watersheds, where our lakes are going to be in much better shape in the future. So that's all I really have to say here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Doug. And I think we're now into the Q&A. And just as a reminder for folks, we're doing both raising our hands and also looking at messages put in the chat room. So I believe, Sean, you're going to help us work through those. And
Yes.
okay.
So the first person that was trying to ask a question was Jalal Mapar, and they raised the fact that they wanted to ask a question. If they're available, would they like to speak now?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, my name is Jalal Mapar. I live at 2030 Upper Lake Drive. First of all, I want to thank you for coming and sharing this information. I have been communicating with RA staff and including the board for some time now. I want to tell you that from a resident and member, the perception for us has been that the response comes across as reactionary, and it seems to be very ineffective in communication. And I would say that all of these things, ineffective communication, lack of transparency, and not knowing what's going on, have resulted, I would say, in some level of trust in your handling of the situation. I really appreciate Larry's description of what's going on in the background. So my question to the RA is, are the resources being managed properly in a situation like this? And also, bear in mind, in my opinion, and many other people feel the same, accountability and planning are both important. I think you can demonstrate that you really care about residents and members by forming a formal working group and getting people involved. We want to help as well, we really do. But if we don't know what's going on and the communication is missing, we make guesses, and I don't think you want that. Do a formal working group, get people involved, act on their recommendations, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk.
You might want to go to the next slide, Larry.
Okay, so the next person to raise a question was answered in the chat by William Peterson, by Will, was about South American Elodia. I guess it would make sense for us, if you'd like to chime in on what that is. Larry?
Yeah, this is Will. I'm the watershed manager for Reston Association. And if you guys can read the comments that I put in the chat window, South American Elodia is just another example of one of those non-native invasive plants that can be found in the lake. And as Larry mentioned earlier in the presentation, that was one of the plants that RA has managed in the past. Although it may be present in our lakes, it's not noticeable to the point where we are currently managing it.
Okay, the next question from Mary Prochnow. What is RA doing to educate and limit use of lawn fertilizer for lakefront and nearby properties?
Doug, you want to tackle that one?
I will mention that one of the recommendations in RACER that is now part of our report card process was to expand education and outreach programs and opportunities to focus on cultural eutrophication of our lakes and ponds in Reston, their causes and their solutions. And as part of the response that we saw from the board and from Reston Association to that recommendation was they applied for a grant to put on a workshop for residents in Reston as to what they could do to implement low development impact technologies on their yard or property to reduce runoff. And that was held at the Lake House last year. And it was well attended. There were, I think, I don't know, maybe 60 or 70 residents that showed up for it. So that was a beginning. Obviously, this year, because of COVID-19, there's been a lot of programs and activities that would have otherwise been happening at the Nature House, for instance, that haven't been able to get off the ground in terms of education outreach as much as in normal years. Larry, you might have some other things to add to that.
We do have a, I can't remember the last time we published it, maybe Will knows this, but we have a lakes brochure that, speaks to some of those things, Doug, where individuals can, have an impact. You talked earlier about what one can do on their own lawns, or perhaps even a cluster that would join together to do things maybe a little differently, like fertilizing fall, those kinds of things. And so maybe Will can comment on when that was last done. And certainly that's something that we can, get that information out for everybody.
Well, let me mention also when Racer comes out this year, the update of it. And I think in the 2018 Racer, which is the current version available to the public, the water resources chapter of that is divided into several sub-chapters. One's on lakes and ponds, which is pretty much what I've been reading from here. There's another chapter on streams, another one on watershed management specifically. And in that chapter of Racer, there are a number of references to technologies that you can apply on your property, but there's also hyperlinks to websites for where you can get free advice and guidance and support from water conservation districts and other places like that. So I think we'll be probably expanding on that in this year's report, which would be available to the public, hopefully at the end of this year.
Okay, so we have another question from Kevin Dandy. The question is, the golf course, does the golf course use fertilizers that negatively impact the levels of nitrogen and phosphorus?
I'm not a golf course superintendent. In the conversations I've had in the past with Reston National, actually similar with Hidden Creek, they're looking at the bottom dollar. And so what I do know is that they do testing and only put down the fertilizers they need. But unlike residents, where the state, I can't remember what year it was, but banned phosphorus in over-the-shelf fertilizers, which was a really positive thing. I do not believe that applies to commercial interests. And so that is something that we should follow up on specifically.
I did, because I actually live on Reston National Golf Course, I did run into one of the grounds keepers in the last week, and I asked specifically, did you change any of your treatments this year from previous years? Because I was kind of curious if there was something that differed this year. And he told me that no, they had not changed type or kind of chemicals that they use. But I know that Larry and Hank, we've reached out to set up some of those. I think we've been meeting with the golf courses about annually, just to do a kind of a partnership discussion with them that has not only to do with where our trails cross each other, but Ruston National, I think we're trying to get that set up now. So I think we should pursue that line of question as well.
Okay, the next person that was in line for the questions actually has their hands raised. I believe they want to ask their own question. Lori Zell.
Thank you. And thank you, Ruston Association, for having this meeting tonight and for sharing a lot of information. I'm Lori Zell. I'm at 1946 Upper Lake Drive, part of the SOS group. I have a couple points to make this evening. One is, wanted you to know there are 54 people on tonight who are interested, either lake owners or lake users. And you've given us a lot of information. And obviously, you know, we can't glean all that information or really make sense of most of it right away because we're not lake experts. But we are directly impacted by everything that you decide for us. And I think what you're seeing tonight is the fact that we now are concerned that you aren't thinking through your decisions, planning for the long term, or incorporating us in the conversation. And so I am very concerned that you're not prioritizing taking care of the lakes. Specifically, when I just heard Mr. Brett say, you know, there could be any number of reasons why this is happening more recently. And if that's the case, why are we focused on, why is Ruston Association membership focused on movies on the lake and pontoon boats and yurts instead of lake health? It should be a top priority. It should be, you know, I understand that you were going through a lot of different cost scenarios for us, Larry, tonight. I don't know which one of those things is the best long-term solution. What's the best, you know, cost benefit will the whole community receive? This is a resource that we all use. We all want it to be used safe for ourselves, for the wildlife. And I'm just concerned that unless we create some kind of transparent community work group, that you'll make decisions for us in a vacuum again. And when we reach out to you, you'll just turn us away and send us off with standards reply emails. And I don't want to be here again in another year raising a ruckus. I would like us to have a clear, transparent work group. Thank you.
Okay, so our next question is from D. Is there any way to stock the lake with good native plants? The clear water earlier this summer was really so beautiful.
Bill, you want to take that one?
Thank you, Larry. There are beneficial plants. The problem is trying to balance that when you have these invasive plant species. If you can manage and control the invasive species, you can create a window for the native plants to come in. As I said, native vegetation is extremely important for a water body. It becomes more of a challenge when you have people every 75 or 100 feet, somebody has a different lot. Where do the plants come in and where do they grow? And that's the balance that we're trying to achieve. And education is part of that understanding. But I think if the native plants can be controlled selectively, that you will have an opportunity for expansion of native vegetation into the water body.
This is Will Peterson again. I just would like to touch on that as well. One of the great programs that we have in Reston, we currently do, we were limited on the number of the projects that we were able to do this year because of COVID. But we do have a biolog cost share program. And the great thing about that is all of the plants that we plant in the biologs are native. And these include submergent vegetation that's planted in the lake bed in front of the biologs. So if you have an eroding shoreline or would want to take part of that, or even if you don't want to biolog and you're just interested in some of the ideas of plants that you could incorporate into your landscaping on your shoreline, we have plenty of information to provide our members on that topic.
Okay, so we have another, I believe, our board member, Bob Bertine, has his hands raised. Bob?
Good evening. Bob Petrine, 2503 Foxcroft Way. My questions are for Doug. I'm sorry, Doug, but I was distracted a bit when you were talking about the impacts on Lake Thoreau, particularly as it relates to stormwater management. And I heard campus Commons, but there were a couple of others. Could you repeat the projects or the areas that most impact stormwater?
Yes, Bob. The drainage from Reston National Golf Course, Campus Commons, and what was the third one?
Soapstone Drive. I think.
Soapstone Drive. Those three areas contribute an extraordinarily large amount of the runoff into Thoreau.
South Lakes Village Center as well is a big contributor.
Okay. Second question. Have there been any amendments to local ordinances that impact stormwater management positively? It seems to be seems to me that it's one of the areas that we are particularly as a community affected by, because we have 4 large lakes, and it's one of the areas that that seems to get a lot of short shrift when it comes to, particularly for new development. And since the area just north of Lake Thoreau is subject to development in the future, I'd be very interested to know whether there have been any improvements in the requirements for new development or renovations.
I can take that one. So the state upped their stormwater management standards, I believe it was 2015. And with Virginia being a Dillon's rule state, the counties can't do less, they can do more. The important thing to note, and Campus Commons is a perfect example, right now, none of the properties on the north side of Sunrise Valley Drive have any stormwater management. It's all surface parking, gets piped, comes through that large culvert down by Lake Thoreau Pool, the vast majority of it. It's probably 40 acres worth. Campus Commons in the redevelopment will have to provide on-site stormwater management. And one of the interesting things where the county code is not, frankly, hasn't caught up with itself, is that the developer for Campus Commons, TF Cornerstone, will have to apply for a waiver to allow stormwater detention in a residential area. And that's where the county, again, they have a stormwater management requirement, both for quality and quantity that Campus Commons has to adhere to. But for them to do that, because they're doing mixed use and some residential, they actually have to apply for a waiver of county code to be able to do that in a residential area. So hopefully the county will fix that piece, because I know when we hear at the Planning and Zoning Committee and other places that they've applied for, they're going to apply for this waiver. That's the one waiver that I can support, because we need them to do on-site stormwater management, again, both for quantity and quality.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I have.
Our next question is from user BJ18Wise. Are aquatic grasses and grass carp native plants, fish? Question mark.
What was the question, Sean?
They're basically asking if aquatic grasses and the grass carp are native.
The grass carp are not native. They are sterile, and they have to be certified sterile, and it requires a permit from the state through the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries to stock them. So they're very controlled. So they are a non-native fish, but they are sterile. And the concern there is that if they weren't sterile, they would escape and get into perhaps the Potomac River or other places downstream. But yeah, we encourage as many native plants as we can get, both aquatic and non-aquatic.
Okay, so the next question is from Stephanie Sadowski. Is the blue algae a cosmetic or health issue?
Blue-green algae, certain species of blue-green algae, if they're in a high enough concentration or biomass, some of them do produce microcystins, which can cause skin rashes and also can actually attack the liver if in enough volume. And that's why when we have a blue-green bloom, like we had this one, which was a species of Anabina, which can produce microcystins, that we get word out as quickly as possible. Stay out of the water and don't let your pets in the water. Don't let your pets drink the water. But not all species of blue-green algae produce microcystins.
This is Will Peterson. There was a message sent to me, just to me, but Barbara and David Okerson mentioned that they would like to speak. I don't think there was a message in the primary group chat related to that.
Hello, this is David Okerson. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I'm concerned that your presentation has the nature of a self-congratulatory, backward-looking approach. I wonder if you've thought about what caused the problem. Basically, you were trying to control a system when there was an excessive time delay. The time delay does what it always does in a control system, namely you had runaway. And that's what led to the excessive growth of the hydrilla. Then when you threw in the herbicide, the crash of the hydrilla and the excessive growth of the algae. So what are you going to do to avoid this happening again next year? Second question. Do you have an idea of exactly how much biomass you killed this summer? Third question. How many birds did we accidentally or untowardly kill? Thank you very much.
I'll let Bill speak to the second question, but to answer your first question, we don't have control over 95% of the watershed. And so the inputs that drive the sediment and the nutrients are beyond Reston Association as an organization or the individuals who work for it, beyond our control. That's why Doug spoke to the importance of everybody who lives in the watershed doing their part to cut off the nutrients before they get into the lake. Hydrilla can get into the lake on a bird, on a boat. Somebody could have it in an aquarium and say, well, I'm getting rid of my aquarium. So there's lots of ways hydrilla can get in the lake. I don't know how much biomass was killed. We didn't do a measure beforehand nor after. Bill, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Well, it's hard to say exactly how much biomass was killed. The concern that precipitated the blue-green algae bloom was the lateness in the season of the treatment. And the hope was that no treatment was going to be needed. And by the time that a treatment was determined that it was necessary, the plants were very mature and towards the surface. An approach that would have reduced the risk of having the blue-green bloom would have been to treat the hydrilla early in the season when the biomass was light.
Agreed.
But the hope was that the carp were going to be able to get a handle on it and we wouldn't have to come in with an herbicide treatment. So it was like we're waiting on the grass carp and the grass carp weren't doing what was expected. And so we had to react. And when we react, we had a lot of biomass in the lake, and that accompanied with water quality, water conditions, water temperature, all that precipitated the algae bloom.
So how are we going to avoid it next summer?
Well, I will speak for us. We will reevaluate what happened this year and lay all the options on the table and then make a decision, based on with RA as far as the best approach to take in 2021.
And could I ask again the question about blow-by or unintended deaths of waterfowl?
I did not see, and Will Peters.
Yeah.
Can you?
So me and myself and Garrett, the watershed specialist, we're out on the lake a number of times, and we personally didn't see any dead fish, turtles, or waterfowl, or any kind of birds at all. We did get one email from someone that showed one picture of one dead fish, and we also got another email from another individual of one dead turtle. So what we saw when we were physically present on the lake was little to no dead wildlife. Whether, if a bird or a waterfowl is impacted and flies away, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to track that, but we didn't see any of death along the shoreline.
Well, we had 50 geese that aren't here anymore.
Correct, but they could have left for any reason at all. They could have flown over to Lake Anne, or they could have migrated. It doesn't necessarily mean just because they're not present on the lake that they've died somewhere else.
Also, the geese have now come back. Just this past week, I saw as many as 30 geese on the lake. I think because the water quality improved, they're returning.
Well, they may, but it strikes me that Reston Association puts an enormous amount of effort into carefully planning things in advance. I mean, Lord knows how many blue-green algae blooms have been caused by the wrong color paint. And yet it doesn't seem to have put an awful lot of planning into how to prevent this problem this year, nor to have thought carefully about how it's going to prevent it in future years.
So should we go to the next question?
Well, I don't think you've answered the question about planning.
Well, this is Hank. I can tell you that we're taking strict notes and listening to what everyone's sharing with us. And we are right in the middle of the budget cycle. We're going to be getting data that helps us understand what we should be doing next year, that what would prevent this. And we're going to make sure it gets in the budget that the board gets a chance to see and decide on. This sort of meeting has been very helpful for us to understand what as our members are experiencing and what our experts are sharing with us. So there's a lot that goes into what's impacting these lakes. We're learning that. There's no simple formula to necessarily solve it, but our experts are going to be giving us advice of how this will not happen in the future, or to prevent it from happening in the future. And the fortunate thing is we're right in the middle of the early stages of looking at the 2021 budget and planning for 2021. So it's the perfect time for us. And we've already got, a line item in the budget to see if indeed we need to increase funding to make sure this doesn't happen next year. So I think that's the best answer we can give you right now, that we're gathering the information, we're getting the feedback, we're finding out that, among other things, better communications with the community is absolutely critical. Keeping you all informed and involved is absolutely critical. And it may also require that we have to put more funding towards this issue to make sure it doesn't happen in 2021.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Sean, do we have other hands or questions?
Forgive me, I was muted. We have a question in the chat room. What are the names of the algicide and herbicide used in the lake?
I'm going to turn that over to Bill.
We use copper-based algicides. That's really the only effective algicide. It's what the drinking water reservoirs use in their drinking water treatments. As far as the herbicide, there's a variety of different ones that we use, different contact herbicides, and then we're looking at using some systemic herbicides. But
what were the
products that were used this year were Reward and Clipper. It was a combination of the two. Those were contact herbicides.
Next, we've got Gloria Muscadine asking, I believe you've already touched on this, would education and outreach offered to Reston National, since they have been noted by RA as a significant impact?
Yeah, I think Julie touched on that earlier. We're trying to schedule our next meeting with them, and this will be high on the list of agenda items.
Let's see. Then the next person I've got back that would like to be on camera and has their hand raised is Mary Prochnow.
Hi, I'm Mary Prochnow, and I live at 2000 Swans Neck Way and been a resident for over 20 years on the lake. I have a few follow-up questions. One, we've talked a lot about what happened and hopefully having a plan moving forward. What was the scientific criteria that was used to decide to treat the lake this summer in July, late July? The reason I'm asking, for 5 years, Will knows me fairly well from emails where, as soon as the hydrilla starts to get tall, residents will start to say, hey, it's getting bad. And we always get, we're watching it, we're monitoring it. Oh, we need to wait until it gets higher up in the surface level. So I feel like I've received a mixed message tonight from Reston Association. Part of it is what we've been told in the past, and then what we saw as a reaction this summer without a lot of notification or reasoning, except for what you've publicly said, which was at the request of residents of the lake. The second part of this question is, when you do decide to put a herbicide into the lake like you did, what's the mitigation strategy that you have in case it goes wrong?
So I'll answer that. To the first question, we discussed with aquatic environment consultants earlier in the year about the hydrilla, and we made a decision that because we had stocked 80 more grass carp, that we would give them a shot at controlling the hydrilla. Because our preference is not to add herbicides or algicides to the lake. But I don't know if the vast majority of people on this call would agree with that. So we waited, and then we consulted with aquatic environment consultants, and what we specifically tasked them with is going in and treating the hydrilla, not all of the hydrilla. We specifically targeted areas that were being most impacted in some of the coves, but there were areas that were not touched. So that's how we made that decision.
But what criteria did you use? I understand how the decision was made, but I don't understand what the criteria was used to decide the timing of putting the herbicide in the lake, because from what the conversation has indicated, it does seem like the timing was bad.
I'll jump.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Jump in here. The timing isn't necessarily bad. The timing is just what the timing was. We treat a lot of hydrilla, and different places do it at different times. The fact that it was July when it was noted that the hydrilla was going to top out and really impact lake users' ability to use the water, that's what kind of dictated the timing. It's an acceptable time to do the treatment. We treated Lake Raystown for hydrilla around July 10th. So their treatment was conducted at basically the same time frame, maybe 2 weeks later. You guys were 2 weeks later, but the timing was an okay time to do it. It's just the extent of how much died at one time, and with the heat caused the algae bloom to come on.
So in planning in the future, are you, if the grass carp don't take hold, which again, we're all hoping that the grass carp does its job, I guess will you avoid late summer when the volume of the hydrilla, again, the reassurance to us that the decisions that were made won't be repeated? Because I haven't felt like we've gotten that answer yet, that we are not going to have a repeat of this.
So Mary, as Hank stated just a couple minutes ago, and I had on one of my earlier slides, we are looking at increasing the budget for treatments. And, here's the tricky part, okay? And again, lake management there's a lot of science, but there's some art to it as well, having done it for almost 40 years. We have to make a decision early. And so to come in and treat with a systemic herbicide, that decision has to be done before the hydrilla can be seen by most people. And that's when it'll be most effective. So, that certainly wasn't the case this summer. And we're prepared, to do that next year. If that's the way the community wants to go, then I suspect, Hank and I can work to get that in the budget, and ultimately it'll be up to the board to make that ultimate decision. But again, that decision is one that has to be made ahead of time. And, we're certainly prepared to do that.
Okay, thank you. And I think if, as other members have requested, if we have better communication and some sort of working group or some way that we can have that communication. Again, I don't think any of us on the lake want decisions on the lake health as you've thoughtfully laid out, that it is an art, it's a science, and we don't want to feel that decisions are being made simply by input of people unhappy that they can't get their boats out. And we want it to be based on good scientific principles. And I think that was completely lost this summer. And I think it's critical moving forward that we understand the criteria for some of the decisions that you guys are making.
Fair enough.
Now we've got next person that's asking for a question is Craig Gross. He's messaged in the chat, but has not shared his question. Craig, I believe you are muted.
Sorry. I'm Craig Gross, live at 2012 Lakewinds Drive. Just have a few questions, kind of more fact-based that I've been curious about. One, are the pellets, are they a non-selective systemic killer, or is it targeted at certain aquatic plants?
The pellet application, when it's done in a low dose formula, the way that the pellets work, the pellets interfere with the plant's ability to photosynthesize, so it can't produce food for itself. So you have to target the plant early in the growth stage, as soon as it comes out of the soil. So we typically like to put those pellets in right before the plants sprout. The plants sprout into the low dose herbicide. It interferes with photosynthesis, and the plants kind of starve and senesce over a period of 45 to 60 days. So you have to go back and re-add the pellet to keep the dosage rate at that targeted rate, but keep it at a low level. The unique thing about the hydrilla is it is really sensitive to the systemic herbicide, more so than the native plants. And if you go in with a low dose, you may leave some of the hydrilla, but you would be less impact on the native plant species at that rate.
Okay, thanks. Another quick question I have is about the carp. It sounded like the carp got out of control and ate a lot of the weeds in the past, or the grasses. Why can't, when they count fish, remove some of the carp, or is it the 40-acre lake just too much to be able to do something like that?
We, when the carp get large, they're and Bill does fisheries work, they are one of the most difficult fish to get out. Bill, I think you would agree with that, but.
I was surprised that the state, when they did the survey, actually harvested the grass carp. They're very hard to electrofish.
Okay. My last question, and I'm come from Minnesota, and we live on lakes, and certain years our weeds would get bad, and they would put it each lake had an association, they would put an assessment, because we would, and there was a lot of companies that did weed removal, and they would hire it out, and they would bring it back down. For us, why can't we make the CapEx of these systems that, to me, I saw the slide, I think that one's pretty high, saying 170 grand for 70, 90,000 to get a pretty good size weed harvester. I feel that the hydrilla, I'm not the expert, obviously, is already in the entire lake, and there's concern about fragments going, but why can't that in bad years kind of be like mowing the lawn when like the pellets aren't working effectively or something like that?
We've put that option out there, and I'm sure that'll be a discussion with the board.
I'd be happy to pay as a lakefront owner an assessment towards something like that. It benefits everybody. It's a natural way to remove the weeds, and I think it's a better solution than using chemicals. And that's my questions, and I appreciate your time. And I'm just speaking on behalf of myself, and I think RA puts a lot of science into what they do. It's really hard to predict what's going on, and I think we've seen where people complain about the hydrilla, and then the RA gets pressured to do something, and then we have an event like this that nobody wants, but it's kind of the consequences of living with nature and invasive species. Thank you.
And Mr. Gross, this is Will Peterson again. I just wanted to throw out there or add to a little bit of the answer for you. As Larry said, we are researching the aquatic harvesters. We've looked at a number of companies that actually have a very good variety of sizes, and we're trying to look at the smaller ones because some of the big, the reason that we treated it was a lot of people said, hey, it's affecting my boat. So we're looking at the smaller ones so that they're able to get into the shallower coves.
Yep.
But at that same note, just because we're looking at, do we want to put money into a huge investment at that, look at other management strategies, or maybe try to use that as, or hire someone to do a similar work. There's only one local company that I'm aware of in Virginia that actually has a harvester that goes out and do that. And they did not give us a quote specifically saying that, yes, we do have a harvester, but we do not harvest hydrilla because it does spread. So unfortunately, the local company wouldn't give us a quote for that. But as Larry said earlier in the presentation, there is one other company that's up in New Jersey that we're waiting for a response. Maybe their response will be different, but it is one of the management strategies that we're looking into.
Yeah, I would suggest we just buy our own equipment. We have RA staff that are doing landscaping, lawn work. I assume it could just be mowing the lawn when needed, and then we have it and it's all natural. Thanks.
So next question in the chat, I believe this has been partly covered, but do we know, from Maria Allen, do we know if the levels of blue-green algae have gone down over the last few weeks, or is it likely to remain at high levels until the weather turns cool?
I can go ahead and answer that a little bit as well, and then Larry or Bill can add to that. Me and Garrett have been going out into the lakes and monitoring the conditions since the algae bloom started. The algae bloom pretty much is over. There's always going to be some amount of presence of algae in the lake, but when the bloom was at its highest, we had about a ½ foot visibility because of the amount of algae that was in the water body. Just last Friday, the algae is at such a low level that we're back down to, we used a Secchi disc, which is a measure of that you can look at the turbidity in the lake, and we could see back down again for about 4.5 feet. So huge difference between when the algae was first present in that giant bloom right after the hydrilla to just last Friday. So yes, the amount of algae has decreased a huge amount. We did put those signs out around the lake, and we are probably going to be removing those signs about the algae bloom within the next couple of days, just because its amounts have decreased.
Okay, now next person that has their hand up to speak is Harris Kimmel. If you would unmute.
Hi.
Okay, we can hear you.
Hi. Actually, it's Michelle Kimmel. Still logged in as my son. I would just like, I have 2 questions. The first is a yes or no. So you've heard now from multiple members of the community that we would like a formal task force to handle this long term and in a transparent way. Can you commit to doing that tonight? Yes or no?
It is, I think, is that for me or is that for Julie as board president?
Whoever the buck stops with, who can commit to it?
I think this might be a good segue, Sean, unless we have a whole lot more hands, into the second part of this segment, which was talking about community engagement.
Just so you know, Julie, we have about 22 questions.
All right. Michelle, can you hold that question?
Okay, but before the night is over, I would like a yes or no, because it took the community, it took quite a bit of effort on the community's part just to get this. And I can speak for myself, but I think a few others, we're all struggling right now. We don't have the time to go lobby RA to take care of the lake. So we want to make sure that this is handled properly. So a yes or no would be good there. My second question.
Let's talk about how the community and how RA can collaborate on that. So Sean, can we get through?
I have a second question though. So my second question is, there's also been a discussion of adding to the budget. And then I think Will also mentioned that he was unable to do some things because of COVID. Yet we also hear that we were able to go outside of normal budget procedures to consider adding a $13,000 movie on the lake event. So I would just like a better understanding of, and really an accounting of, how staff time is being spent. Are we spending it on events that the community can handle on their own. We don't need RA to do that. We need RA to take care of our resources. How is staff time being spent on this? And then also, the budget, also any increase to the budget would end up being an increase to our assessments. So, I'd ask that before we just start adding things to the budget, again, it's done through a formal task force and can be properly considered. Thank you.
I can address your comment about movie on the lakes. The movies on the lakes was actually suggested by one of the members who lives in Lake Thoreau. And that was going to be actually budget neutral. We had already received sponsorship from other groups in the community as well as companies. And we were looking to have the whole thing funded as through sponsorship.
But you haven't yet.
Yes,
so RA would have been on the hook.
It was suggested as a way to kind of, it's been a really challenging year. And it was suggested by a member that we look into it. The Parks and Recreation staff looked into it. And ultimately the board said, let's not do it this year. Let's maybe consider it for next year.
But I just want to be sure we're talking about the priorities of how staff are using their time. And when you have so many people in our community suffering, we're begging contributions of businesses that are also suffering to host a movie party on the lake. And really the only people who can attend are some of the wealthiest in our community.
I think it's one of the reasons why the member suggested it is because people have been suffering and they thought it might be something that could help the community. Again.
Yeah, but your intended audience are lake owners.
Actually, it was open to everybody, but as
you have to have a vote.
As the board considered it and said, well, maybe it's something we should be looking at next year. And there were actually a lot of companies in the community who said they wanted to support it.
Let's do something for the folks in our community who really need it.
It's very, very good point. Thank you.
So now the next question from Gloria Muscadine was sort of a follow-up to the education. They're wondering how clusters and local HOAs would be involved in education and outreach regarding runoff control and how it's maintained by those clusters or the HOA.
So the watershed or the stormwater seminar that we put on last fall that Doug had mentioned earlier, we had actually reached out to as many of the clusters that are around the lakes as possible, just because they were our primary audience, because the watershed ends up in the lakes. And we had a number of cluster representatives for that. In addition, I have plenty of that information. So clusters, single family homeowners, anybody, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to discuss options or ways to try to help control the runoff. Unfortunately, though, just because a lot of the property is not owned by RA, it would just be more recommendations than actually being able to do specific things for you. But at the same time, there's a great organization called the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. Our local office is situated over into the Fairfax County Government Center, and one of the representatives actually lives in Reston. And I've worked with him on a number of projects in the past. And depending on what the project is, there's actually grant money that's available to clusters and homeowners. So anybody that's interested in getting information on those programs, I'd be happy to give that to. I do have a number of thumb drives that we can hand out to anybody interested as well. And just to comment also back onto the fertilizer stuff, the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District also has a service where you can send in a sample, or they can come out and take a look at your property and tell you specifically what fertilizer needs your yard would need, so that you're not just going to Home Depot saying, oh, I'm getting a fertilizer bag, but to help you be more educated about what would be best for your yard and its proximity to the lake. And Dan Schwartz with the Northern Virginia Soil Water Conservation District is an awesome resource, and there's plenty of information on their website about that as well.
Hi, this is Gloria Muscadine, and my name is actually Karen Mattern, but I don't have the ability on this Zoom meeting to change my name. And I just wanted to sort of clarify that it's fine that you have all this information available for those who ask for it. There's not necessarily representatives of our HOA or our management companies on this meeting or actively involved in this issue. And it seems to me like maybe pushing the information to them is more appropriate for this occasion. On Lake Thoreau, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a large percentage of cluster and homes that are maintained by HOA, the lawn service, the treatment plans, and so forth. And they're not getting the message if RA is not pushing the message to them, rather waiting for them to ask for it. So I just didn't want that to be lost in the dialogue.
No, I completely understand. And unfortunately, we're not able to, potentially get in touch with everybody, but we do try our best. We did have a really good video that I had posted earlier in the chat that was available to all members. And, if there's cluster representatives, I think that anybody can sign up for the RA News. But there was a great fertilizer video that shared that information. There's just a lot of, it's difficult to reach out to every single person or every single community in Reston saying, hey, come to me and talk to me. I don't have the ability to knock on everybody's door, but we did, I know our website is in flux right now, but we do all have that information available on the website as well. I'm sure there's going to be a good watershed program. We had information about the biolog program. So we can also look at what we're doing, and we can also look at ways on how to improve that to try to reach a larger audience in the future.
Okay, so our next question that I have here is from D. How can we make planting native plants a priority now? I believe we've talked about that.
We did, and I think we can certainly look into doing some additional planting. I think we have to recognize that if we're going into an early season, perhaps targeted control for hydrilla, or if the decision is ultimately made to stock more grass carp, which also do feed on native plants, we don't want to be throwing money down the drain. That doesn't sound right with a lake thing, but we can certainly look into what plants would do the best in a condition like Lake Thoreau.
Next question from Russell Riggins is actually, it seems like it's a support for like a working group. They responded to the folks that have requested a working group, and their question is, can someone please respond about communication could be improved, and if a working group could be created or considered in the future. I believe you've already addressed that. Shall I move on?
Yeah, I think Julie we're gonna talk about the
Community engagement. You said you had about 18, 20 more questions.
We've got a bunch more. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Let's see. So Dennis Neese has made several comments. His mention, I guess, response was about the mention of dead animals. He mentioned that he's been on the lake every day and has not seen any dead animals. And the geese have flown through here. A ton of them flew here through last night. Carolyn Kirby, let's see. It seems the vascular plants, even the dreaded hydrilla, keep the blue-green algae at bay. So it seems to me that we should learn to live with a certain amount of plant life as we patiently wait for the grass carp to reach the point where they are keeping the hydrilla manageable in terms of recreational use of the lakes. It was a statement, not necessarily a question. Let's see. Okay, no. Let's see, Maria Allen, do we know if the levels, let's see. Okay, I believe that was asked already. Okay, we've got Tammy Petrine with her hand raised and patiently waiting to speak. Tammy?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have two quick things. First of all, regarding what Doug and Larry said regarding the development in the corridor, dumping stuff right into Lake Thoreau. Even though there are approved plans in the corridor, heaven only knows when they will be actuated and there will be any relief from the runoff from Campus Commons in particular. As that is the case, I'm wondering if it might make sense to contact Walter Alcorn and ask him if there is any, William talked a little bit at Mr. Peterson about this, but if there's any county help that we can get in that kind of runoff problem from the corridor. That's just a suggestion. The other thing I wanted to know is residents are talking about their boats are actually grounded due to the fact that there's so much silt and runoff into the lake that it's built back up the area that was cleaned out in, I guess, April of 18. And my question there is, that seems really fast for buildup of the bottom of the lake to the point where boats can't even be, taken off their mooring. They're moored because they're stuck. Has VDOT changed what they're doing? It seems to me that in the last year, this last winter, which wasn't particularly terrible, but we had ice. And it seems to me I saw a lot of sand being put down versus the chemical brining and salt. And I'm wondering if we could get a hold of VDOT and see if that has impacted the amount of physical silt and gravel, not gravel, but sand that's pouring into the lake. If we're the watershed for, all of these streams and all off Soapstone and Sunrise Valley. So that might be a suggestion to see if there's been a radical change in what they're doing to keep the streets from being slippery. Thank you very much for all you are doing. And one last comment to back up what Mrs. Kimmel was saying about movies on the lake. Please don't take up any suggestion given by one person. There are people that are in such much worse shape than people who have access to boats and lake houses. RCC can do movies anywhere. Let's do services for our members and keep our infrastructure strong and healthy. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the work everybody is doing. Thank you.
Okay, our next.
Tammy, you had some good ideas there and some things that I know that we've got conversations that need to begin.
Our next question in the chat is from Kevin Dandy, and he was wondering what we're doing with the current dead hydrilla that's floating.
The hydrilla, Will was out of the lake, I think this morning. I think I saw you right after you were out there. And I think there was only one spot where they saw hydrilla on the surface.
Right. This is Will. And we've been, evaluating how the hydrilla has been reacting since the treatment. Bill Kirkpatrick did advise that, eventually it would sink down to the bottom, but immediately after the treatment, it separates and then floats to the surface and then decomposes and then eventually sinks down to the bottom. And I mean, at the very beginning, there were islands pretty much in every single cove. But as of this morning, The only cove that I saw any floating remnants of the hydrilla anymore was pretty much right along some parts of the Turtle Pond area, closer to where Purple Beach is. We went out there Friday as well. I mean, we've been out there every couple of days to check on the lake, but even comparing it to last Friday, the amount of floating hydrilla that was in Turtle Pond, comparing it to this morning, was about half. So it's continuing to decompose and continuing to sink into the bottom, and we're predicting that it should all do that fairly shortly.
Okay, Beatrice Leon is thanking us, RA staff, for this presentation and videos. Frank is asked that we ensure the working group, if I guess the working group goes forward, is aligned to all Reston Association lakes. It was a comment. Julie, I guess you had raised a question a while back about the mechanical harvesting. Did you want to raise that to the public?
Sure. I figured I was allowed to ask questions too. I thought I heard, Larry, you say that when we do mechanical harvesting, that one of the downsides is that you actually can break off segments, that those segments can begin anew, and it's not like you can collect everything as you're harvesting and prevent.
Yeah, that's correct. Certain species, hydrilla being one of them, fragments can reroute. The other thing to be aware of with a harvester too, those harvesters, you're going through a thick weed bed, you are picking up turtles and fish that you then have to extract before you put the plants into a conveyor. It then goes into a truck to go compost somewhere.
Okay, yeah. All right. Sean, I do see, I think at least a few more hands up, but it is 8:15 and I do not wish to shortchange our discussion about community engagement and some of the ideas that people have, some things we might go forward on. I happen to see Sterling, I think, with his hand raised, just because he happens to be right there in the front of my screen. Do you think we can kind of wrap up the questions in 5 minutes, or ask people if they're still, send us, send emails to Larry and Hank and me?
Yeah, Julie, this is Sterling. No, I didn't have my hand raised. I'm sorry if I misled you.
That's okay. Sean.
So I would say right now in the chat session, it looks like we've got maybe another 10 more questions. It's up to you if you'd like to ask folks if they could submit their questions via email.
Let's see how many we get through in 5 minutes.
Okay, so forgive me as I'm sort of skimming through.
Okay, I just know that, I don't really want to have a 5-hour meeting. I'm kind of tired of 5-hour RA meetings. I'd rather break it up into 2 if need be. So if it makes more sense for us to, close off tonight and have a second meeting to talk about that community engagement piece, it might be helpful.
So as I look through the chat, it seems there are a series of statements that have made, not necessarily questions. I can definitely capture these questions or statements and share them with you.
Okay. Do I see Jennifer has her hand raised?
Yes.
Thank you. And this might segue well to your community engagement piece, but I'm hearing a lot that you guys are monitoring the lakes and that you're out on the lakes. Recently, Will just said we're out there a couple times a week. Those are all things that this community, who has been requesting a meeting like this for a long time, would like to hear about, and there are different avenues that RA can use to get to us, and it doesn't have to just be the Friday news. You can send an email to the lake owners group. There's the Lake Thoreau neighbors group. There's the clusters. That's what this community is asking for, is that communication, and we still haven't gotten the communication that we're asking for regularly. So I would ask that if we have the data, that we put it on the RA website, at least for members who want to go and find it, they can go look for it. But, you know, I keep saying this, you guys keep hearing me say this for years now, two-way communication is really important and we need to get there, because this community would not be as riled up as we are if we had the two-way communication throughout the summer on what was going on with this lake. Thank you.
Okay, you know, in a normal board of directors meeting, you know, the agenda usually says, okay, well, you're going to be done. According to my agenda, it says we were going to be done by 8 o'clock. And I might have to add, you know, ask for a vote to extend the meeting for another half an hour or whatever. I've got that we're 20 after 8. I want to kind of throw this idea out there because I have heard a fair bit of ideas that came along as we were doing the Q&A. And I do think so much of it, as Jennifer has said, is around communications. And it's not just reactive communications, but proactive communications. And whether it's focus groups, periodic, quarterly kinds of, you know, a community engagement kind of meeting to give a report of the lake's environmental health. I know that the Razor team on the EAC, the Advisory Committee for Environment, is working on the chapter on lakes that's supposed to come as part of their buy-in or report. So I know that that's going on, and they have a project team that's focused on the Razor report and that input. People can go to the EAC committee meetings. They're all Zoom now, so you know you can attend that way. We've got the biophilic pledge, and as somebody said about reaching out to the clusters, we have been doing some of that in terms of, you know, what overall things are they all dealing with. Stormwater management is one of those areas that we've looked at how might we do a better job of helping all the clusters deal with that, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess my question to you all, and I don't know if we can do this by an informal raise of hands, but I was wondering if it would be helpful to digest what we heard tonight. This video's being captured. It's going to be viewable, as well as the presentation materials that you heard. Would you like to regroup and have a second Zoom meeting to discuss community engagement, or you want to spend another half an hour? I'm willing to take, you know, hand raises or react.
Just so you know, Julie, there have not been any additional questions in the chat room.
Okay. So want to keep going? I guess I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yeah, why don't we keep going and finish up?
Okay, let's try that. So back to community engagement and how might we do a better job, as Jennifer said, it's a two-way communication. We can capture some of these ideas and post them as action items. I want to speak to the term working group just for a moment. In RA's vernacular, working group has a very specific meeting and very specific action and activity. And as such, it does require that a charter, a task, if you will, an objectives be laid out, and a timeline for those activities. It requires a decision on who should be on that committee, and applicants putting in and being interviewed by the board of directors for belonging to that task force. We've done them in the past for the lakes, boats, docks optimization, of which the The water quality was one element of that working group, but knowing that it was part of other things we were doing, that working group really focused more on things that had to do with those who own boats and docks and optimization of the lake in that sense. We've had one on the Hook Road facility, the park over off of Fairview, as to what the community might desire for any changes to that facility. So there is a very specific use of the word working groups. We do have, as part of some of our advisory committees, what we call project teams. And they're limited and they're focused on whether, like for EAC, they have one that's focusing on pedestrian lighting and or litter management. There's the one that's focuses on this RAISER report, the Reston annual state of the whatever. I can't quite get the words to the RAISER report or acronym, Doug, I'm sorry. But I do know you had indicated that this was the year that the lakes, all of our lakes, not just Thoreau, are being looked at as part of an update to that. So ideas or things that, you know, people are thinking about. I know Michelle said, well, can you commit to a working group tonight? No, I can't commit to a working group tonight. I'm only one of 9 board directors. And so no, you know, we do charge our staff to maintain and preserve our facility. So we'd want to maybe come back with some other ideas about how best to do that community engagement beyond, quote unquote, a working group. I'm hoping I can hear from some others and not just talk.
Well, Julie, this is Hank. I think one of the things I've heard is that we need to do a better job of pushing the information out there to the community. And I think that's a very valid criticism and pointing out an area where we need to improve. As Will shared, we do have a lot of information and expecting people to come and just get it to our website. So I will make the commitment that I will talk to the communications department and see how we can do a better job of pushing this information out to the whole community about how they can play a role in the health of the lakes. And maybe it's just a matter of using some of the social media techniques that we already have and taking the information that's already in place and start pushing that out a little bit more frequently to the community, including this biophilic commitment that we have and we're so proud of here in Reston. So I can indeed commit to talking and asking and if necessary, putting in the 2021 budget a little bit extra funds that the board has a chance to review and approve that will hopefully make it better for us to be able to push this information out more clearly and frequently. And we certainly can do a better job and communicate to our members that live and operate on the lakes and have boats that go on the lakes. And we'll talk to the communications department and see how we can do that better. So internally, we can do that. And you know,
I was thinking, Hank, you know, on our website in the past, well, and we still have, you know, we have a whole section that's focused on development in Reston and helping people know what's coming down the line on that. And lakes being such an important asset for our community, and it's one of the things that makes us unique from other areas in the county, is that we do have lakes. So Fairfax County Park Authority doesn't have a lake like we have a lake. So maybe there's a way that, as you say, we can do a better job of getting that information available to people, whether we post lake data history and ongoing data collection to that website. Doug, you want to share?
Yeah, I'm going out on the limb here a minute. So
That's
Bear with
okay.
me.
We like it.
I want to expand the discussion of the concept of the two-way communication and providing more timely information to the public beyond just the lakes. So I'm throwing out a suggestion here that we know that there's not easy access to a lot of environmental information right now about our community that used to be available in various places online because we had the temporary website. A new website is going to be developed for Reston Association. And I suggest the importance of having real-time, useful environmental information on all of our environmental health issues, whether it's our urban forests or stormwater management or lake and pond health or stream restoration or what chemicals that we use for managing issues in the community ought to reside somewhere in an environmental file that all residents can easily get to. And you know, I could foresee that being divided up into water quality data and urban forestry data and recreational data and other things of that nature. And then that could be a place where also there's frequently asked questions can be posted. And when special studies come along, like the one now on Lake Thoreau, and laboratory results are available to the public, they could be posted in those files on that site. That way, it isn't information that goes into a Reston Dropbox that people have to click 5 or 6 times around to try to find. It's available to them in one easy click, but also there's a chat room or a FAQ application of it where you can get a rapid response from somebody accountable within the Reston Association to your concerns. So I throw that out as something that might be considered when Reston designs the new website.
Yeah, I think I saw Mike Leone on, but I think that Mike, our communications director, as they plan for that new website, not only its design, but its content, that they are planning to go out and ask, the community what they need along with the different advisory committees. So perhaps that's, something that we can make sure that we have a focus group to gather requirements or interest for those, for the lakes. So, and I see that it says 2 participants raised hands. I see Sarah's hand. I'm not sure about anyone else, but I see Sarah's. Our liaison, our board liaison, to environmental advisory.
Before Sarah, Harris Kimmel, again, it wasn't Harris, I guess?
Michelle.
Yeah, it's Michelle. Look, I just want to say 2 things, but one, we have a lot of places that we could live in the DC metro area. And I know most of membership base that is committed to protecting those. It's not just because we care about the environment, we also care about our home values, quite frankly. I think I want to be very clear that, if I'm using the wrong product on my yard, I want to know about it. You need to engage us as, participants in this, not just, the folks who are annoying you with too many emails. We're working side by side. These are our common resources. Major priority from a communications plan. I don't understand why this would have to be a budget add-on. this should already be included in the budget or should be part of the communications plan. This is too important.
I'm sorry if you thought that I was saying it had to be a budget add-on. That's not indeed the case. What I was saying is I was going to talk to the communications department. And if needed, we have to add to the budget. We will certainly do that. I don't think we do. And certainly Doug's points that he brought up are very valid. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to see the communications director's most recent presentation at the board meeting, what Doug is describing is exactly what we're planning on doing with the new website once we're able to develop it in 2021. So I'm sorry if I misspoke and you thought I was suggesting that the only way we could communicate better was to be adding money to the budget. That is indeed not the case. I'm sorry if that was how you interpreted what I said. I apologize.
I think Michelle brought up a really good point, and it's the way you think about something, and that's that, you know, we are, Ruston Homeowners Association is made up of the people who live here. We are all members. We all own this corporation, and I think what she's saying is, don't be so prescriptive, but be interactive. Allow us to help participate in the preservation, enhancement, maintenance, to be actively involved is, and I think that that's a very important point to be made. As Doug, when I think about the biophilic pledge, you know, and we ask our members to consider that and do that. Well, how can we help them help ourselves, right? Sorry, Sarah, I went on a tangent.
No, you're good. I just had a quick point to add. I think Doug took half of my statement already and covered that aspect of the website and having the data out. One of the things that we brought up when Tom and I were looking at, you know, requesting you for this meeting was the EAC to work with the staff, to consult and review when staff establishes goals and long-term plans for the lake and other natural resources. I think that's the component that we're missing here. EAC is uniquely positioned to play that middleman. We've got fantastic volunteers on that committee that go out and research and have got the content, have got the expertise. And if we just engage EAC with staff and they become the middleman between the membership and the staff, I think Doug and I, we've looked at, or at least the EAC has talked about going out to clusters, bringing the biophilic pledge to the cluster leadership. Someone on the chat mentioned, talk to the cluster presidents and they can spread the news to their members. So we can sort of go grassroots and help. And this team right here, everyone on this call that we're talking, if we just start working together on a periodic basis, I think this, I can guarantee this will not happen again. We might have something else, not the hydrilla, but at least we can make sure it's not hydrilla again.
Well, I don't know about it never happening again. I mean, I look at the amount of days we had hot weather in July, the climate change, which Doug and I talked again about, I think it was just yesterday. You know, there are factors out of our control, but I think there are factors within our control. And those are the ones that we need to, you know, ask of Hank and Larry and Will and Bill with his aquatics consulting company to help us do the right thing for our community.
In communication with EAC and the membership. I think that's the little piece that we're missing. EAC and the membership.
EAC has in their work plan this year, do they not? Doug, one of your work items was outreach and communication. So to Sarah's point, I think that.
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah. But collaborative outreach.
Well, thank you.
Any other points to be made at this time? Other than obviously for us to take what we heard tonight, try to synthesize it into some ideas and get that communication back out, figure out a way we're going to have some two-way communication and best use the energy and concerns that have been brought forth tonight.
We'll do that. Yep.
All right. Then I'm going to thank everyone for their participation tonight. Thank our staff, thank our community members for coming tonight, spending your time on a Monday and staying for as long as you did. Really appreciate that. And I do promise, as your president and South Lakes, that we will put together a communication and make sure that it matches a bit of what Sarah and Jennifer and Michelle, Lori have brought up. And we'll run it by Tom, who lives on the lake, and make sure that we've addressed it from a actual user. So again, the video will be available on YouTube. The presentation will be available on our website. And maybe Mike can put out something in Friday's RA News Blast to make sure that people can find the links that they need to get to all of that. Any last comments from Hank, Larry, Bill, Doug, Tom, Sarah?
I thank everybody for coming out and listening and giving us your feedback. Hopefully everybody learned a little something tonight.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank the experts that shared what actually took place. And I really do appreciate all the feedback you gave and how we can improve. And so thank you. Thank you for taking the time to share with us.
And I want to thank Tom, Karen, and Sarah for pushing the envelope here and helping us get to this point. So I truly appreciate that effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolie and the RA staff.
Great. Happy evening, and go take a walk.
And stay safe.
Dogs are asking me, where's their walk? Gotta go.
Bye.
Bye-bye.